You can burn up our mosques and our homes and our schools, but our spirit will never die. We will not go down in Gaza tonight.
And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. I was just looking at my very recently repaired show clock, and despite a whole new clockwork in there, it's just not keeping good time anymore, so I got to keep twiddling it and adjusting it. That is life in the United States of America, just endless amounts of crap that does not work, for which you will pay tons of money on interest to the money junkies here. All right, I want to talk about this whole thing about UNESCO, where UNESCO admitted Palestine as a member, and the United States promptly cut off all financial support for UNESCO, originally trying to take the high ground that they thought this was reckless and premature and unwise because, after all, Palestine, the United States supports the formation of a Palestinian state, but it can only come into existence through direct negotiations with Israel. Now, wind that back 235 years. Yes, we are in favor of a United States of America, but it can only come into existence through direct negotiations between the colonists and King George III. That's the attitude that we're getting from the current government. That nations cannot be allowed to come into existence without the permission of the other nation, which happens to be sitting on the same land. It's stupid. It's never going to happen. Nations are brought into being, usually through force and violence, Israel itself being the good. That's what's really absurd. The U.S. government is saying Palestine just can't declare itself to be in existence, and yet that's exactly how Israel came into being. David Ben-Gurion walked out and said, "We're Israel, we're here." Harry Truman said, "Yes, you sure are." Now, as it turns out, there's actually a United States law that was lobbied for by the Israel lobby, AIPAC, all those people, the spies, where it is actually illegal for the United States government to give money to organizations that are nice to the Palestinians. That's the kind of iron-fisted control the U.S., that Israel has over the United States government right here. Now, the video that is in this story, U.S. cuts off UNESCO funding after Palestinian vote. It's worth watching. First of all, because you're seeing that spokes drone for the U.S. government up there saying, that we really do support Palestinian rights and Palestinian statehood, but only when Israel says it's okay. And then there's this reporter who just nails her to the wall and exposes her to be the totally clueless bitch that she is. So, now meanwhile, Israel's out there making their proclamations. The window of opportunity to thwart the Iran nuclear program is closing. Now, Iran's nuclear program is a power station, and nobody has any evidence to the contrary. And remember, Israel was the one screaming that Iraq was building bombs in the basement of their power station when they bombed Osirik. And then following the invasion of 2003, the inspectors went in and they found the remains of a power station. And no secret clandestine nuclear laboratory like the one Israel is known to have under their reactor at Dimona. So it's just, Israel wants the United States to spend our money and the lives of our children to go whoop on another one of the people Israel doesn't like, which I think is pretty much the entire world right now. Why is the window closing? Well, I think Israel understands. The United States government is about to collapse between the financial firestorm that's about to hit and millions of Americans standing in the streets, of our cities all across the country saying, no, we're not going to pay the bills anymore. I think the U.S. government is going to go the way of the USSR, and Israel understands that whatever government is going to replace the current federal government in this land is not going to automatically grant vetoes protecting Israel at the United Nations from now on, and is probably not going to be signing as many checks full of U.S. taxpayer funds for Israel. And without that money and without that veto, Israel has to stop acting like an Old Testament kingdom, and they have to start behaving like a 21st century nation. They got to draw their borders and live within them. Meanwhile, Israel is moving ever more recklessly and precipitously to enforce their will in the region despite growing international condemnation. They are ethnically cleansing Palestinians out of East Jerusalem. Now remember, the United Nations has declared Jerusalem is a shared international city. Christians get 1/3, the Jews get 1/3, and the Arabs get 1/3. And Israel is basically grabbing East Jerusalem, which is supposed to be the Arab and Palestinian section, and they're just grabbing it, they're fencing it, they're kicking it, they're ethnically cleansing. And now Israel, which has been bombing Gaza over the last few days because some bottle rockets came across the fence that we all presume were fired by Israeli agent provocateurs, Israel's now saying if they dare ever apply to the United Nations again for statehood, that Israel's just going to declare war on them. If you try and be a state, we will kill you, is what Netanyahu is saying. Does that sound like Israel is ever going to agree to a Palestinian state? Of course not, which is what makes this official position of the United States government laughable if lives were not at stake. Meanwhile, this was kind of interesting. A poll commissioned by the European Commission over the EU among sample of population from the European Union overwhelmingly concluded that Israel is the biggest threat to world peace, ahead of North Korea, ahead of Iran, or ahead of Afghanistan, who we are told are the bad guys. And Israel's immediate reaction, of course, is, you're all a bunch of anti-Semites. You have fallen for Hitler's propaganda. We're not the threat to world peace. All these other people are. In other words, they've lost the propaganda war. Now they're whining and screaming and crying and whimpering, and we're so misunderstood. We're the victims here with our nuclear bombs. You know, and all the rest of that stuff. We know Israel's the biggest threat to world peace. All the wars currently underway involve Israel as a causative effect, initiating. We've got all these reams and reams of news stories before Iraq. Israel says you must contain Iraq. Israel says we must attack Baghdad. Israel says we must go into Iran. They're out there even right now in the desert with their pom-poms in front of the border to Iran saying, go, kill, fight. Blood makes the grass grow. Blood makes the grass grow. They're cheerleading all these wars on. And as I keep pointing out, since 1979, when Iran became an Islamic republic, they haven't invaded and conquered anybody. Even before they were an Islamic republic, Iran, for the last 200 years, has not started a war. They defended themselves during the Iran-Iraq War, which is instigated at the goading of the United States of America. But they're not culturally in the habit of invading other people's territories. Quite a contrast with Israel, which bombed Iraq and bombed Syria and bombed Lebanon and the massacres of Sabra and Shatila, the attack on the USS Liberty. Just a cast lead, which may be about to repeat because we're hearing that ISPs in Palestine and Gaza are being interfered with again, hacking attacks on them. Invasion of Lebanon, Gaza, Nablus, Syria, on and on and on. And then, of course, the United States, which just, we're attacking everybody. We're always attacking people. Of the three countries, United States, Israel, and Iran, the only one not waging wars all around the area is Iran. And so, yeah, the people of Europe are smart enough to see that. So, of course, Israel immediately goes back on the fallback. You're just anti-Semites. You hate the Jewish people. No, we hate the government of Israel. We're not anti-Semites. We're anti, and there's a word I would put in there, but the FCC would shut us down. First syllable rhymes with grass. Second syllable rhymes with bowl. You can take it from there. We're not anti-Semite, we're anti, and you can plug that in there. And there is a difference. It is not who Israel is that is the problem. It is how Israel behaves. They behave like the kingdoms of the Old Testament, smiting this and fire and storm and wrath and Samson option this. They're completely out of touch with the modern world. They don't want to live in the modern world. They want to live in that fairy tale land in the Old Testament where God will come down and smite their enemies and smooth their path to other people's money. And it's just not going to happen. Israel is a nuclear power. They're pretty much open about that right now, except when it comes to the United States of America. And the only reason they're being cagey there's actually another U.S. law that says the U.S. government can't give them your money if they have nuclear weapons but refuse to sign the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty or allow inspections, which, of course, Israel does. So it's kind of a nudge, nudge, wink, wink, where your government of the United States is breaking its own law and saying, yeah, we will not support nations that have illegal nuclear weapons. We're going to give money to Israel because we know, wink, wink, they don't have any nuclear weapons.
Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome back to hour number 2 here. We're getting more information from Greece. Apparently, Papandreou is insisting the referendum will go ahead. And he's adopted a very strange strategy. He has issued a statement that he is convinced that the referendum will show that the Greek people want to continue being in the EU and that the vast majority are in favor of the Eurozone deal. And the reaction to that is he must be crazy. And my reaction is he's crazy like a fox because he's left Merkel and Sarkozy no place to go with the discussions. Because he's going to keep saying, the referendum will prove you right. And Merkel and Sarkozy can scream and yell all they want. But he's left them no place to go. So we'll see what happens on that, but it's interesting. We're already seeing risk assessment, financial risk assessment entities around the world are already reeling from this and saying it's just going to go crazy. Because if the referendum, I'm not sure when it's supposed to happen. One source says it's planned for January. The Eurozone deal is not going to hold together until January. And he could have it tomorrow. And it's going to go down to defeat on both counts. So we're in the final stages. This whole Ponzi scheme, private central banking model is about to have its Hindenburg moment. Over in Denver, police have clashed with protesters again. Apparently there's violence and bloodshed. Up in Oakland, they're getting ready for a more massive demonstration after shooting Scott and after throwing a flashbang at the people trying to help him. The protest in Oakland continues to grow. People are angry. People are fed up. They're not going to turn around and go home now. They're not. They feel a sense of history changing before them. Who wants to go home from that? Sit and watch American Idol again. They lied to you again. How much longer are you going to put up with a government that lies to you like that? You need to look in a mirror and ask yourself that question. How much longer are you going to put up with this nonsense? When you have a government and a media that lies to you about everything, you cannot know the reality and the truth of the world around you. If you go back and you study the history of Germany in World War II, the German people living right there in Germany had no idea there were slave labor camps just a few miles away. It was all being hidden. And we already know the U.S. government is practicing torture and assassination and has concentration camps. We can't say that we know everything the U.S. government is doing out there in the hinterland, in these far-flung corners of the world, in these little bases out in the deserts. We don't know what they're doing. We certainly cannot assume that it's all benign. I will have a truthful government, or I will have no government at all, and we will be right back. It's really completely out of control. Now, remember where I said that there was all of a sudden this claim that there was a secret nuclear plant that they'd found in Syria, and they showed us a picture of a building. And we're wondering, why they're doing that. Now I think we're finding out here because apparently Russia's foreign minister, when he was addressing the Cooperation Council for the Arab States of the Gulf, was saying Russia will not allow Syria to become another Libya. It's a pretty much flat-out declaration. So the United States is trying to create a case where we have to go in. Those gosh darn Syrians, they have a building that sort of looks like the kind of buildings that you might have a uranium centrifuge inside. And we've got to invade and bomb the place so we can go in and take a look. At which point they'll find absolutely nothing, which is what happened in Iraq. And so, yeah, it looks like the U.S. is just going to go on into Syria. It's one country after the other after the other. It's amazing.